What's up guys, it's Alton, and today we're going to look at how to build your raid team in Guardian Tales so that you can maximize your damage output. I'm going to be examining the factors that come into play like party buffs and elemental advantages, so I hope you stick around until the end of the video, but if you rather watch and copy other people's playstyle, that's fine too. It's how most people learn to play the game and discover new lineups, so I personally have no issue with that. However, if you want to break away from that habit and learn how to build teams on your own, then this video is for you. Right. To kick things off, let's go through some need-to-knows. Players like to strike a balance between damage and toughness, so they might bring tanks into the fight for the taunt and added toughness party bonus. I'll tell you now that you don't need to bring tanks into raid unless you're struggling with survivability. Tanks are meant to soak up damage, not dish them out. Yes, there's tanky offhand DPS units like Future Princess and Marina, but you'll get more out of damage-oriented heroes. You should only use them when you find yourself struggling to keep units alive or if you seriously have no other heroes to add to your lineup. It can be helpful sometimes, you just have to make do with what you've got. But I highly encourage you to practice dodging against raid bosses, or better yet, learn to predict enemy movement and attack patterns. If you know where the enemy is coming from and what attacks come next, then you can time your own attacks to deliver effective hits. I was able to bring a 110,000 toughness Garam into battle and survive through round 22 of boss battles because of that. And it's not like I always keep my distance and relied on Veronica. There's a bit of that, but if you've seen my playthroughs, you'll notice that I go head first into battles, so it indicates that just a small dose of awareness to your enemies and surroundings can keep you alive through tough stages of raid. I'm not saying you should ignore toughness, of course. Complete your collections, increase your guardian level, and do what you need to do to boost your stats. And while you're at it, make sure their chain skills trigger properly. Chain skills not only allow you to immobilize your enemies, but it also unlocks a new set of attacks and increases your damage based on the ailment you inflict. Whenever you use a skill, you inflict a certain type of ailment on the enemy. It can either be downed, airborne, or injured depending on the weapon you use. When immobilized, downed enemies receive an additional 50% damage from melee attacks, airborne enemies receive an additional 50% damage from range attacks, and injured enemies receive 200% injury damage of your main hero's DPS. Because of the additional ailment damage, some chain skills and heroes work better with others. It then becomes your job to discover which combinations work. And the easiest way to tell, apart from their chain skills, is to look at their elemental attributes. All heroes and enemies give and receive damage based on their elemental class. And before I give the percentage, let me quickly go over the rotations. Fire units have the advantage over earth units, earth over water, and water over fire. Then we have light over dark, dark over basic, and basic over light. Those with advantage do 30% more damage while receiving 30% less damage from heroes and enemies with the disadvantage. This is why mono-element teams are so effective in raids. They're basically designed to complement each other and deal with enemies of opposing elements. That being said, elemental affinity isn't the only consideration. We also have party buffs, and I would argue that they're more important than elemental classes, but it really depends on how developed your heroes and equipment are. Sometimes, a well-developed hero without an elemental advantage is better than one that does have the advantage but is less developed. But before we get into the specifics, let's discuss party buffs. There are many ways to look at party buffs, so I'm going with the simplest and most straightforward approach, which is to prioritize the buff that provides the most damage and universality. What I mean by universality is that it benefits all heroes. For that reason, I would place buffs like Elemental Attack Up lower than Skill Attack Up because it only benefits one hero class. And since we're trying to maximize our raid score, I'll have to put HP and Defense Up low on the list. So with that, I would put Skill Attack Up, Melee and Range Attack Up, and Crit Chance Up at the top, probably in that order, and leaving room for Elemental Attack Up somewhere in the mix, depending on team composition. If your team is mostly made up of a single element, Garam, Coco, Bianca, and Veronica, for example, it would make sense to choose Garam over, let's say, Eugene, a hero with melee attack up, because Garam may only benefit water heroes, but we have nothing but water heroes in our example, and no one benefits from Eugene's melee attack up except herself. So skill attack up is number one because it benefits all heroes and it causes them to do a lot of damage in such a short time. That doesn't necessarily mean, however, that you should only choose heroes with this particular buff, because you have to take into account the other factors that we've discussed. Let's say you have Bari, Gremory, Mia, and Coco, all with their corresponding weapons. Sure, collectively their party buff adds up to 304%, but that doesn't translate to big damage because, first of all, Mia's chain is designed to heal, not damage, and the chain ends before you can get to Coco if you go in the order of their lineup. We haven't even gotten to the issue of elemental disadvantages with this team. Clearly it has its holes. What do you do about that? find better synergies, of course. Replace Coco with Veronica if you have her, and switch Mia out for Gabriel. Make Veronica your lead and you'll see a third of an increase in your damage. The chain is a bit wonky, I admit, but it's an improvement from the previous combination. Perhaps you value both elemental traits and party buffs. Then maybe your lineup will look more like Bari, Aoba, Tinia, and Gabriel. The damage output will look similar to the one mentioned before, and you get the added bonus of a better chain skill, or at least one that isn't so fickle. Maximizing damage is more than just increasing your team's collective DPS. You have to factor in other things such as crit chance, attack speed, and skill cooldown. Bari, for example, currently has the highest base damage, followed by Garam, but her attack animation is slower compared to Garam, so he may actually be doing more damage per second, and in a time run like Raid, that can heavily influence your score. So what I'm saying is some combinations work better than others, and that's where trial and error comes into play. That applies not only to heroes, but equipment as well. All heroes individually work better with their designated exclusive weapon, but some heroes are more effective in teams when using different equipment. The reason for that is because of the pairing of a desirable party buff, a chain skill that works, and a weapon that improves damage because of an elemental advantage. Elvira may be a fire unit, but she pairs well with water units, and if you give her the Blue Rose, Rachel's EX weapon, you can do well in Raid. Same goes with Nari if you give her a Nest of the Water Dragon basket and pair her with water units. I've brought up a lot of water units in my examples, but that's mostly because they're the units I've spent most of my time on. You can find plenty of interesting combinations outside of water comps, like Lupina with Liberator, Future Knight with Terminator, Ioba with Sarnga. Plenty of combinations out there. I should also mention cards. If you're very good at dodging or have well-developed heroes, then you should remember to switch between attack cards because the extra 10% damage, 5 for each card, goes a long way. Crit cards are good too with the right heroes. Again, if you're struggling to survive, it's fine if you want to use HP or defense cards. Negation, on start, and heal cards, they're all situational in my opinion. Really depends on your needs. And recently they released a new card that boosts skill attack by 10%, so that's something you may want to look into. I've never actually used it, so I can't say much right now, but it's an interesting card to add to the game. And I guess I could say the same thing with merch. So to recap, we've gone through avoiding tanks if necessary, predicting enemy patterns, status ailments, chain skills, elemental advantages, party buffs, hidden metrics, and equipment loadouts. That's gonna be as comprehensive as I can make it right now. I have a few things worth mentioning as well, and they are that inflicting status ailments will differ based on each enemy. You may have noticed that it takes a few times when landing your skills to trigger a status injury, so that may change how you decide which hero to take into battle as your main. And finally, your raid score damage for your current team, if you take a third of it, can indicate how much damage you'll do in the actual raid. That may come in handy for you during off seasons, but of course you can know your score from practicing against bosses when raid takes place. That's it for this video. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of the raid season.